You join me today on one of the most iconic chalk streams in the world, the River Test. This river rises at Ash near Basingstoke and flows for about 40 miles down to Southampton. Before setting up, I took some time to bait up in my chosen swim, getting the fish comfortable and hopefully working them up into a feeding frenzy. I positioned myself here in the hope that any natural baits would be washing into the river from here. Before flicking the rod out, I spent a bit of time just taking in the surroundings, enjoying the wonderful scenery and watching the mist rising off the water. I decided a special river needed a special reel, so this was the first trip out for my Adcock Stanton. These classic British reels date back to around 1938 and are still loved and treasured by many today. I paired this with my slightly more modern Drennan 15-foot Match Pro rod. I used standard float fishing river tactics, which was just a stick float and then a tiny barrel swivel to stop any line twist. I was using a size 16 barbless wide gape hook, which I find has a little bit more purchase when fishing for these river fish. A special sloppy mix made up of mostly blended corn with some hemp and some ground bait would be more than enough to cloud the water and keep these fish grubbing around all day. The hook bait would be maggots, and a constant stream feeding little and often would hopefully keep the fish in the area. It can usually take a bit of time to build a swim fishing on a river, but the first run through is always an exciting one. I was pleasantly surprised, however, after just a few seconds the float buried and I was into my first fish. As is often the case when fishing these chalk streams, the lively tail slaps of a trout are a sure sign they've got to the bait before any grayling has. You'll notice that as I'm playing the fish, I'm continuing to feed the swim, ensuring there's a steady stream of maggots running through. I kept the bait going in, hoping there was some nice grayling to be had, but I just couldn't seem to get away from the hungry trout. Despite not being the intended species, it was still good fun. Knowing this sloppy blended corn mix was working at keeping the fish in the area, I continued to bait up, hoping that one of these grayling would trip up. Not too long after, I was into a slightly better fish that felt like it was just holding its weight in the depths a little bit more. It went on a few powerful surging runs, trying to shake the hook along the inside reeds. Steady pressure and just giving the fish line when it needed it was enough to wear this lovely fish out, and as it came up I could see it was a really nice grayling. Anyone who's tried to hold grayling before knows how much of an experience it can be. But after a couple of close calls, she was relatively well behaved and decided she'd pose for the camera. As the morning wore on, the frost melted and you could start to see some of the vegetation and a few fish moving in and out. Being able to watch fish underwater in their own environment shows you how comfortable they can be with you around, and gives you a much better glimpse into their habits and feeding. The weather was due to turn really windy and rainy in the afternoon, so we planned to stop for lunch and discuss what we'd caught as well as have some hot drinks. Close to where the meet-up point and the car park was, there's a longer, steady run. And although it's a bit shallower than the other parts of the river, it does contain a lot of fish, although they are quite a bit smaller on average. I spent 10 or 15 minutes along this bit, just feeding maggots and seeing what I could catch, but as usual along here I couldn't get away from the trout. One after another, trout after trout came to the net. With lunch done and dusted, I couldn't stop thinking about the spot I started in and how much better the stamper fish were, and so I came straight back to this spot. It was pretty much the same in terms of a lot of fish, but mostly trout making an appearance. With the weather quickly turning nasty, the few other people that had braved the conditions had left. I did spend a little bit of time in community service on snag removal duty. Despite catching a couple of trout as soon as I'd come back to this swim, the sport very quickly went dead and I couldn't get a bite. I made a few changes to the depth in case I could try and entice them to feed in, but I couldn't get a bite on maggot. I realised I'd put a pot of corn in my bag, and so I switched over to this, hoping that the brightness and the change of bait would do the trick. The change had an instant effect, and the first run down with corn I got a bite, pulling out of a fish. I fed some more corn and ran the float through again, knowing that I would get another chance. Pulling into a good fish, it was obvious this one was a grayling. Having worked so hard for this one in the really heavy winds and sideways rain, I played it really gingerly, not wanting to lose it. As she slipped over the net cord, I was one relieved angler. That feeling of satisfaction when you get to lift your prize for the camera never goes away. If you've never had a chance to fish for grayling, have a look at a chalk stream near you. There's plenty in the southeast, and I'll be happy to point you in the right direction.